Welcome to What's Your Sign? I'm Julia Loken.
I'm Stevie Goldstein.
And I'm the new couch of this podcast.
Yes.
Like, you got a new couch? No.
You got a new couch.
You got a new couch.
My couch came. Praise Allah. It is it is here. Praise God. Praise Yahweh. I now believe in God now that this couch has come. West Elm is still my enemy, but I have a new couch. And this is now the second set of couches I've moved, like Sisterhood of the Traveling Pants, onto a friend. So now I've seen like it's my second old couch I've seen in like a friend's space too. So I'm just like in the full couch ecosystem right now. It's so good. But
Nice.
did come with mismatching legs. You know, that can be switched out. I just knew it wasn't gonna be a full, like, I'm like, of course there's still gonna be something wrong with this thing. But I'm kind of glad because now I have like really good ammo for the West Elm customer service call to come. I needed like a day off from like spending hours with them on calls. But now I'm like, all right, I'm coming back, seeing what type of refund I can get for my troubles.
Yeah, I guess that's true. I was going to say, can you see the legs? Can you see the mismatch? Or are they?
It's like, no.
The amount you pay, you deserve to have the right ones.
Yeah. No,
And
you're right.
That's the thing. Also, like the customer service hell, and I tell everyone I've talked to at West Elm, I'm like, I know this isn't you. I know this is systemic. Twitter and Reddit. I should have checked Twitter and Reddit before we ordered this couch because I would have seen the truth, and not what they'd show you in the showroom, which looked great. Oh my God, it's ready to go. I can sit on it and try it. It's not an internet couch. No shade to the internet couches. I just want to see what this is like in real life before it arrives. And now she's here, and it's been cute. And now I'm like, now Rosie, my cat, keeps sleeping on, like, she doesn't sleep with us anymore. She just sleeps on the couch. So it's cat approved, which is very, very sweet. But
Aww.
yeah, some chemical in that couch has lured her in, and she won't leave.
Well, it is this changing time too for weather. Like
Mhm.
my dog also has his own room. It's under the bed, but
He sleeps under the bed.
That's his like private
His
space.
cave.
Like he has certain toys that he like keeps under there and stuff, and like I have to go in there and check every once in a while because I'm like, what the fuck's he doing under there? But I think it's like a hot weather thing. Like it's a little bit cooler. It's dark. It's like not,
True.
it's low and whatever. There's no light. It's very like
She is in the
restful.
cooler, darker space now.
And so maybe she'll be back is all I'm saying.
Mm-hmm.
Don't close the bed to Rose.
It's just like the submarine people. They're in the cooler,
Oh my God.
darker space now.
I'm gripped. I'm completely gripped.
I got gripped this morning as we, the nation is not the nation gripped by this tale.
TikTok definitely is. I don't know the nation. I don't know if my mom's heard about it.
This is a good test, actually. I should text. almost want to text my mom right now. Like, have you heard about? It's like a mom check. Do you know about the submarine? I think it feels TMZ level, which I equate to mom.
It might be news.
I think it's
on the news. Yeah,
it has to be. It's pretty newsworthy.
The only reason to me seems newsy is only because of the discourse going like, how is this getting so much attention and the refugee ship didn't get any attention? So I don't know if it actually is like news, but it seems news.
Mm-hmm. And let's see, what day is it? It's June. We're recording this on June 20th, so who knows? There might be major updates by the time this comes out, which is not much later. So who knows? But yeah, it just seems. I feel like Titanic has been trending too, so something does feel a little. I don't know. Titanic's been in the ether as well. So it just feels very timely.
Yes. But it also feels so on the nose of like anything to do with the Titanic, like where it's like, why would you go on another? Doesn't that just feel like
appropriate?
Yes. Or like, or just like, dude, this, the whole thing is about like tragedy, about things breaking and not working and all of that. Like, it just feels so on the nose. I mean, it's beautiful, but
yeah. If you don't know, how do you describe this? 4 or 5 rich people went onto this
bizarre
submarine. I don't. Is that even a submarine at that point?
It's a tour that's provided. 3 of the people are working it, and I believe, or 2 of them are working it, and 3 of them are passengers. And it is a tour that's offered to view the Titanic wreckage, which is 12,000 feet below sea level. For those of you who don't know much about what that is, 600 psi, you cannot survive. A human cannot survive at 600 psi. Also, most marine animals are not that low. Obviously, there are undiscovered species and very deep diving animals and dwellers that we are aware of, but even some of those ones that you see in like aquariums and stuff, like the weird guys. Octopuses in those, like, yeah, those are also higher. Most of them.
Wow. Okay. This
12,000 is deep. Yeah, it's not. And so the like excursion or whatever it is, I don't believe this is the first one. So I do think that's a reason why people are. That's
what was my question. I was like, is this the first go?
I think that they trust in seeing that it's been done before, possibly.
Okay, so the people aboard is 2 business guys, 1 the pilot, and then the other guy's the CEO of the company.
Of the tour company?
Yeah, of OceanGate.
Okay.
I thought it was being called OceanGate. Like,
no, it's OceanGate is the name of the name.
Like, I thought it was like a Watergate, like OceanGate, but
it does feel like
OceanGate.
But also, it does feel so. I mean,
they wrote their story.
Yes, I mean, it couldn't have gone any more.
The MV Polar Prince.
It is tragic. From what I understand, the vessel is not. You're not able to open it from the inside, so likely,
they're bolted in.
Yeah, likely that they imploded. That's like the most reliable scientific guess. Otherwise, they could be stuck on something.
Oh my God.
But in which case, even if they are at the surface, they would not be able to get out.
Also, no air tag on this thing.
Like, they do. They do. They lost communication, I believe, at like.
It's just so deep that it fucked everything up.
I think that it normally does communicate, and I believe that it has a device. I don't know for sure, but I think it has a device that gets sent up if it like loses communication that is supposed to help people track it. I mean, the Coast Guard are looking, but it's not looking good.
One else, I mean, it's a time. The window of time too, where you have opportunity to do something about it is so rapidly
like they
closing.
Have 2 days of oxygen or something.
Yeah,
something rough.
Something just under. From the last thing that I saw, that was probably also old news, so it could be less at this point.
Sorry, I think I gave you incorrect information. The depth of the Titanic, I don't think it's 12,000 feet.
That sounded right. It's
1,300. It's saying 4,000 meters. I don't know exactly. Different ones are saying different things. I'm not a scientist.
It's mad deep.
Yeah,
it's deeper than creatures go. And also, I mean, I've even like just going back to my knowledge of Titanic from the movie Titanic. Like, no one was in the things going down to look at the Titanic. They always had like high pressure robots. I feel like people going down that far is very difficult, very rarely fuely done. Yeah, like just not a thing that happens. We don't have like casual service to that far deep in the ocean.
I mean, George Lucas has gone really far under. There are like famous rich people that do this.
Yeah. Well, James Cameron's famously
that's who I mean.
Obsessed.
That's who I mean. James Cameron. Why am I?
I was like George.
Why don't I have a brain today? I did send a link to the NBC article that says 13,000 feet, and then I think James Cameron has gone much deeper actually.
Wow.
Like I think he's gone.
He's very
the Challenger 36,000 feet. Yeah,
but I feel like there's something like I don't want to say heroic. But to me, I feel like James Cameron is like, yeah, I'll go. Like James Cameron would be like, yeah, we're gonna get and it's like if we get stuck down there, then I went doing what I was trying to do, take things to push it to the limit, whatever. There would be something like noble about that almost, whereas this feels, and not to, again, tragic, not to belittle the extreme, and I mean what I would imagine is dire and terrifying, and I mean would not wish that on. That sounds like a would you rather like challenge, you know, but the way that they're describing this as like tourism of that, where it's like, yeah, that's ooh,
yeah, $250,000 tickets. So yeah, again, these are, and the crew or the people on the thing are very, very rich, and there's just a lot, it brings up a lot in terms of, I think, of also triangle of sadness, parasite, you know, the joke is too very easily there, and it is very tragic and sad, but it's also like, yeah, I guess, is this what we should be doing? It looks like it has been down there at least 24 times before.
Okay. Yeah, I also think
that's still very few. I'd need at least like 100 plus trips as a rich billionaire.
I'd do it. I'd do it tomorrow if somebody was paying for it.
I bolted bolted inside. That's what gets me. I need an escape hatch, even though you're fucked. No, like
it's worse to do that.
Yeah, that's like the escape hatch.
That's the worst thing you can do. I also feel like it's not like that thing specifically maybe isn't the right way to do it or whatever, but like whatever James Cameron did, it's a completely different kind of vessel, you know?
Yeah.
And all of that kind of stuff. I think the number of people who've been down that far in the ocean is less than have been in space, and it's weird. It's higher pressurized, like that. You're not in air, so it is. Yeah, it's definitely dangerous.
I don't think. First of all, what's there to really see? I mean, I know the Titanic, but like we kind of get it's like decrepit, covered in shit and algae.
I saw an interesting Twitter thread that got me. That was like one of the benefits and one of the reasons for finding the Titanic, not for this specific expedition, but in general, because everyone was like, why? One of the phenomena that happened after the Titanic sinking was that people did not most of the survivors were women and children, and people did not believe when they gave their account of how the ship sank, that it split in half, that you see in the movie, and you hear that big sound and everything,
right?
Because most of them were women, and also because all of the electricity went out shortly after, and so then it's dark and you can't kind of see these things. But finding the wreckage proved that these women were not delusional, and they did actually see what they experienced. And they also noted, which like absolutely makes sense, that a bunch of Titanic survivors kind of like changed their stories or just didn't say anything about it after this thing, because these women were so vehemently disbelieved. And they believed like one guy who like came in the water and came out, like missed the whole thing because he said like, nah, it sunk in this way, but he was like underwater and the electricity had already gone out by the time he had submerged and all this kind of stuff too. But it was just like,
that's so interesting.
Of like validating people's experience through a really extreme event being one of the things that is worth why you like investigate those things and document those things. It also made me think about I remember in different college courses and throughout, whenever you are like reading about a historical tragedy, that there's always like pictures and people documenting those things, and it's like, why are you taking pictures? Like, just help the people do something. But I think that this made me think of those things of like, yeah, there is a point to documenting a thing,
totally,
so you can help people like understand what happened, so you can share it for the other people, because some things are so horrific that it would be hard to even imagine without seeing images or having some kind of physical confirmation.
The rape of Nanking's a big one. Like people were like, that didn't happen, and you see the pictures, you're like, ew. I mean, any like horrific tragedy, but yeah, like the Titanic bobbing straight up in the air and dangling there, and then going like this, like who you would think, why would it do that?
Yeah,
but as they demonstrated in the movie Titanic, you know, they did the full CGI layout where they showed old Rose like, this is what happened, which is a great scene. And he's like, Tight.
I'm diving at a shipwreck site on
Whoa.
Sunday. I won't be able to go in the wreck, but
so timely, Lisa.
I'm so excited.
With the trending, with the trends of shipwrecks.
Well, I'm not a wreck diver, so I won't be able to actually go into the wreck, but I might be able to see it from afar.
Are there people that have? Is that a different thing, like a certification to go near the wreckage?
Yeah, so almost everything in scuba is a certification process. Not everything, but yeah, if you like, underwater photography is its own, wreck diving, tech diving, definitely adventure diving. If you go deep, free diving is something completely different. There's just a bunch of different ones, cave diving. And there's certain places where they'll allow you to kind of bypass regulations. Like, I think the cenotes in Mexico are very well known for letting like open water certs go in, even though they're technically caves or whatever.
Interesting.
I guess they're like not as dangerous or whatever. So you wouldn't need a cave diving certification, but it is, wrecks in general are one of the ways that divers die most often, because having overhang above you is like one of the ways to get disoriented, get lost, not know where you're going, and end up underwater without air.
Holy shit.
It's not really, I think Scott's interested in, it's not really my I'm there for the great wide open, but depends on what you're into.
Well,
but I'll let you know if I see anything cool down there, ghosts or anything.
Yeah. Wow.
Hell yeah.
Dude, what if they find them? And
they might. And also, like,
we'll know by the time this releases.
I know it's one of the things you learn in diving. It's not the same at all, but it's like, if you lose your buddy or like you lose contact, you surface like as well as you can, get up to the surface, and then look around and hope. And if you're under and you don't find your buddy, go up to the top and look around. And it's like, they might have just lost contact and been like, all right, let's like
go up,
finish this thing, go up and try to get back in time. Who knows?
Wow. Can you imagine? And then see, my brain just went evil capitalist. The books they could sell, but
maybe they are. Maybe it's all a setup.
Whoa,
maybe it's the whole thing. I also, like, for me, when I was reading about it, I was like, oh, this is like the best like planned suicide ever.
Well,
like,
I just was reading about one of the guys who's already like a Guinness World Record holder or whatever, and I guess I don't know if that would matter in a thing, but then thinking about the same thing I just said about James Cameron, where it's like, oh yeah, this guy's just going as deep as you can go or whatever. Who cares? This guy doesn't care.
I mean, I'm in the planned suicide in the way of like, you're terminally ill and you're like ready to just like, I'm going out with a bang, kind of like, this
is an episode of Lost right now. I mean, that is like, look, OceanGate stocks were plummeting. Everyone there terminally ill. Like, let's just go see the wreckage and wake up to being first class passengers on the Titanic.
Maybe.
Yeah, that's great. That's a great show.
Maybe there's more to the story that will be revealed as Neptune Stations direct.
It says that there's only, I don't know, it's not my favorite news source, but it does say there's
raw news,
40 hours of oxygen left.
Yeah, so that's the one that I saw.
A couple days, we'll know.
Yeah.
All I know is that one of the billionaire's sons went to Blink-182 and was like, my dad would want me to be here at Blink-182 during these difficult times. But it's like, you could not post, but that's a cool, like I don't judge. If you got Blink tickets, you got Blink tickets, but the post is quite unique.
Yeah.
I mean, man, I wish.
What's his chart ruler? Well,
what's his age?
We'll find out.
What's your age, baby?
Well,
gripped.
Yeah, we'll see if anything comes up.
I feel like we haven't had like a very classic this feels almost like a 90s news story. You know what I mean? Like, it has like a very old school feel to it.
This is, baby Jessica in the well.
Yes.
Chilean miners. That's not 90s, but it is the,
yes. like a bobbit dick cut off. Like there's just something, it's so like your brain almost can't wrap around being in that scenario that makes it so it's so wildly weird, but like yeah, like makes it's life here on Earth. We do weird shit all the time.
That's true.
Baby Jessica on the wall. Forgot. Did she get out? I don't know.
Yeah, she did.
Okay.
She did, and I feel like that's one that's like often checked in on, like, where's baby Jessica now?
What's she up to now?
Yeah, find out.
She's killing it.
Up to, as Lisa said, coming up, rising up. Speaking of, let's talk about our topic for today.
Risings.
We're talking about rising signs, continuing our series on, I mean, it's not a planet, but it is a fundamental point and chart component, and we are revisiting all of those as we are. I don't know where I was going with that.
a big one of the three of the big three, a big heavy contender when we talk about our chart. I think an often misunderstood thing. Place. I know I keep wanting to say placement. I guess we wouldn't call this a place. Would you call this a placement?
Yes.
Yeah.
100%.
A placement.
The placement of
That's
your
exactly
degree
what
of
it
your
is.
rising.
Yeah. And it can't, it's a placement. Not all placements are planets.
Yeah, I always think of like the planets being so placed where I'm like, I don't often refer to it as like what placement is your rising sign or whatever. But I think since houses come up a lot, I think it's like this is your first house essentially.
Well, it's also something that I know your birth chart doesn't change, but then we are talking about planets and things moving, but this is the central orientation that determines where all of that is happening too. So it's like, this is the stuff that doesn't, again, I know your natal planets don't change, but the planets themselves are moving. So we are talking about a bunch of things that are in constant motion, whereas your chart structure does not. And when we're looking at transits, this is still all happening based on your first, like you don't move around the same way that the planets are. You are you. And I think that does come from, I don't know, the rising sign does feel like that is that part of that to me. Because even that, you're like, I guess your rising sign does progress technically if we're looking at progress charts, and you will change and go that way. But it does, I don't know.
Yeah, it's a framework. I think that's the best way to look at it, because as most of you probably know, the way that we practice astrology, the rising sign sets up the houses. And even in whole sign, there are certain styles, and it might be equal sign, I'm not exactly sure, but there are certain styles where you'll still see the ascendant, the midheaven, etc. within the house. So it is something that is, it's setting up the way, I don't know if it's like necessarily the way we see the world, but I like to think of it as kind of like a blueprint. And, maybe in one area we're coloring in one thing or adding a bathroom or whatever else, but it's like seeing what we have to work with.
Well, and even something like whole sign house, you still would be counting that your actual ascendant would be that point where if something is transiting it and it is going off of its first house versus your ascendant sort of thing. And that to me, again, gives it that, like, I don't know, this is an important, it is where you become you.
Yeah. Even I think in the ones that don't really use the ascendant as much, it's still informing where your first house begins. So yeah, even if you say like me, I have a later degree Taurus rising. And so when I go into whole sign, I get Taurus 0 degree is like how we see my chart set up. But that is still based on the fact of where my rising is, even though it's at a later degree, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Like we know your first house is Taurus. When you're born, Taurus was rising on the eastern horizon. So I think that's the other part too. It's literally the sign that was rising on the eastern horizon the moment you're born. When you look at a natal chart, it is like a flipped map because the east is on the left and the west is on the right, north, south. It's a hemisphere thing. I remember like learning that in astro school, and they're like, it's just how it is. Like, this is just how it'd be too confusing to read it the other way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think someone just DM'd us too and was asking about like Placidus versus whole sign, a tale as old as time. And of course, there's other house systems besides that, but ones we're going to hear about the most are Placidus and whole sign, at least in Western astrology. And I think the reason I like Placidus is because I like the first house starting at the degree of of your rising sign. Like the first house begins when your rising signs begin. But that's just my personal preference. Like that's just how I like it, because it's very like 1-to-1 literal, like, yes, the degree that it begins. And I think something to know too is your rising sign changes like every 2 hours ish. Mm-hmm. So if you're born, like 2 hours, if I was born 2 hours later, I'm a Cancer rising, be a Leo rising. Well, maybe like not so much because I'm like a mid-degree Cancer rising, 19 degrees. So maybe like an hour-ish later, I'd be a Leo rising. And so that keeps going every 2 hours, and the wheel in the sky keeps on turning.
Mm-hmm. And if you forget, just remember, it's like a clock, except the 12 is in the wrong place. It's kind of like a clock.
6 and 6 is 12.
You can remember that it's 2 hours because the sun will only go through the zodiac once a day. So that's how we can know that.
Oh, that's a good way to.
It's 24 hours in a day, so you're dividing it by 12, and then that's how you know, like, if it's where on the horizon. That's why a lot of times too, astrologers will ask you, like what time you were born, and certain astrologers like Robert Hand, you can kind of try to rectify your chart, but a lot of I know we see it a lot with celebrity charts too, and a lot of the birth times that you get are 10:30, 11:30, and if you have something like that, an astrologer might look at it as something that's been rounded, because generally, like what happens is in a hospital, a baby is born, and then we're like looking at the time after. And so specifically, if you had some sort of difficult childbirth where, they had to do something, and it might have taken a few more minutes to get everything situated, get the umbilical cord cut, get everything like good, and then like, oh yeah, shoot, let's look at the time and record it. So some of those things are just like, all right, put 11:30, or like they're rounding one way or another.
Which I think is another thing that I like Point Placidus to me, because I think that something like that, and this isn't necessary, I don't know if this happens for everybody, but I think that when you ask someone your birth time, if there was something out of the ordinary that happened that led to them writing down a rounded number, normally what they're going to say before they tell you the time is, oh, well, when you were born, blah, 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 blah. And that to me is also like part of a rising sign, almost like your origin story of like how you also came to enter the earth is part of that. And I think that does like inform the rising sign, whether it is its accuracy going, well, it's a rounded time, so I could be this sign, but the thing that everybody told me was this event, not this other thing. And that to me is like, oh, well, that sounds like cuspy stuff where someone would go, maybe I'm this, but I know for certain that when I came into the world, X, Y, and Z happened, and that has formed my identity. It all to me is like the meaning of it speaks to that, rather than like ease of reading a chart, which to me is whole sign, where it's like, yeah, that's for astrology's purpose, but for talking about people, I mean, the actual time is the time. That's the thing. Like, who cares? Actual birth doesn't line up on the hour, like you're saying, the same way. It's this. Sometimes it does, especially if you're, I think we've talked about this too, about more scheduled C-sections and things like that, or people inducing at a certain time, and how that has affected more people being born at like an exact hour, or like in the morning during business hours, so to speak, because you're scheduling things because of medical advances, and how that kind of influences things. But even that, I don't know. To me, it's all about the time and place, which Placidus is time and space orientation, not just, okay, 30, we know the time and now we go 30 degrees accurately or whatever.
I like both. I like whole sign a lot. I think that I mean, if we are at a rounded time, it kind of does make sense to me to use whole sign, if we're not exactly sure, and then we don't want to be setting up the houses quote unquote wrong. And so that to me makes sense. I also think the rising is just such an important point that no matter what chart system you're using, you should be looking at it, because things are going to be happening crossing that. I find that I think I've talked about it before, like I can tell because my sun is it's like degree 1. So it's like the beginning of anything entering Taurus. And then my rising's more on the way out. And like the rising transits are just so much more intense. Like they're just so much more textbook. They're more things that you'll see. Of course, like stuff transiting your sun, the sun isn't necessarily it's not a blueprint. It's not this. It's more about what you grow into and who you are and all of those things. But the rising ones, it does tend to have like, I would say, more tactical effects on your natal chart.
Do you read or ever look at the Gemini ones
all the time?
Late?
I usually do, because if it's a monthly horoscope, I usually do read the Gemini one, because the things that are transiting, they're gonna be transiting Taurus for a very short amount of time for me. But then I also look at more, I guess, daily transits and how they're aspecting the actual points. So I'm not always necessarily needing a monthly horoscope,
Yeah. Just wondering if it hit if you could feel it in that Placidus sort of way, oh, this is hitting these parts versus these Taurian parts. I mean, they're so close too. I mean, that's the other part of back to Placidus versus whole sign, or these rising things being a little oh fuck, is it 5 minutes before or 5 minutes after? Unless it is changing, it's it's not going to be too major, but also they're the signs next to each other or the house next to each other. So it's not oh fuck, I went from a totally opposite sign or something.
Yeah, I think it's different if you have the later degree. In my opinion, it's a little bit better to read the next sign, because some of that stuff might have already just happened to you. So sometimes you're reading it and you're like, wow, this is exactly what I'm going through. But it's yeah, but it was kind of last month's transits. You know what I mean?
Because this is not a planet or a sign, and it changes for everybody. I mean, I guess that's not the reason, but because it represents not the sign itself, but the place, the time, all of those things. I could not refer to my mythic astrology book for this one, which I'm doing in this series. So instead, I'm working only from the Inner Sky today, but by Stephen Forrest. And I liked this because I think, Stevie, at the beginning, you said about rising signs being kind of misunderstood. And I think obviously if you are reading about something, the one thing that you read is this is your mask. This is the mask that you put on for society, whatever. And I don't like that, because I think it infers a inauthenticity or whatever. Also, what is it? What does that even mean? Who knows? Who cares? But I really like this Robert Hand, sorry, not Robert Hand, Stephen Forrest description, because it makes me think of what you're talking about, Lisa, of the intensity of these rising sign transits versus a sun sign. Because thinking about the rising sign, if it is the first house is us. These are the things that are also, to me, no matter what the element is on this cusp, these are things that are happening to your person, if that makes sense, not energetically, not in the way that we see or whatever. And I really liked this. The first house symbolizes our optimal mask, not necessarily all masks or a mask or whatever. And it's our outer expression that best serves our inner needs. So figuring out how to successfully navigate our rising sign allows us to express everything else in our chart. It's the vehicle that lets us do that. The ascendant does not create outer personality. Rather, it channels the totality of the birth chart into the world of action, flavoring and expressing the deeper material. He also notes that we all have social identities and personalities, and we need them. Without them, we could only stare wide-eyed out into space. And again, it's that thing of well, if you don't create something that can be expressing the things, then we're not able to do any of the rest of our chart if we don't have if there isn't a person to express them. So a personality is fundamentally going to be two-dimensional, because no one how could you possibly express all of these different things that are changing and conflicting and whatever at the same time? So we choose one that best fits those things so we are able to express the rest of those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I've always like, I feel like instead of the mask, I feel like the way I've been describing it to people like in a very 101, you don't know what the fuck I'm talking about sort of way. It's like, it might just be how we naturally just kind of hit the streets, like how we're just naturally just going through existence, especially since it does determine which planet is your chart ruler, which is going to be a very loud voice in your chart. And you can just determine that by if you're Aries rising, Aries rules by Mars. What's your Mars placement? Do you have Libra Mars, which is a little more of a softer Mars? That which house is it in? So it's going to give the fuller picture to this big soup that is our natal chart. I think of even two, like I was raised by two Virgos. My stepdad's has a sun like right conjunct the rising. He's such a good sales guy. He's so warm and instantly Virgo and instantly like you feel safe. Or my mom is very Gemini and very sad. So like I think it just does like show where the energy is going to get amplified. And also with the first house too, it's like, you know, I teeter back and forth of like the physical body showing up in astrology, but some might say that we might look like our rising sign. There might be, you know, I've been clocked for my moon face by others before, so there might be elements of the planets that might physically show up in ourselves too, with the first house being the self place, but also not just physical things too. With the first house can also be very much our confidence, our just person, our independence and personhood.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of power in the rising, and I do think it is a place where you can find your strength in a lot of ways. And I guess it is and isn't in that way physical too. I do think you look like you're rising, and I say that as someone who, like, you know, some people I've recently been like, oh, I'm a Taurus rising, and I'm like, oh no, like, because, you know, like if you see someone, you're like, I look like you, don't I? Like, oh no, it's bad. I don't want to look like you know. But it is, I do think there's like a strength, and I think finding, you know, obviously each sign has their own strengths and stuff, but finding how those are strengths through the rising is really really important. I also think that it's important to we didn't do these on the last few. I guess we kind of did on the sun. But we should talk about how it's calculated. And so I think that one of the really important things about learning astrology is like learning to be able to actually do it and not just like type in info. Which definitely type in info and get the right answer to check and like do stuff. But we can talk a little bit about like some ways that you can calculate a point like this. So it's a mathematical point. One of the easiest ways is to find a book with an ephemeris and look through for your time of birth and your birthday and location. Or they might not have the location available, so you just use Greenwich Mean Time or whatever time it's listed in and adjust. You can maybe use a, you know, what are those called? Time zone calculator for that as well. But it's like, think about if you had to do this by hand without a calculator. I think another way that it is possible to calculate a rising sign, and this is one that maybe is a little bit more conducive to like party settings where people don't necessarily have exact times and stuff like that. You can use sunrise. You need to know what sun signs month we're in. So you will need to know something I think you should learn in astrology too is like what day the sun changes over. Generally speaking, it's not always the same every year. So know what sun season we're in, and then use the time of sunrise as house one. And so then you can add 2 hours to get to the next one, and 2 hours to the next one, and 2 hours to the next one around the day. And that one can be kind of fun because if somebody tells you, you know, that they don't know what time they were born, but it was 5 a.m. and it was, you know, winter when I think the mornings come earlier. Oh, they might be the same rising as sun sign, and then you can kind of go from there. Or they might be a 1, 2, or 3, and then you can kind of ask like, oh, do you think you're more Sagittarius, more Capricorn, more this?
Yeah. I think, knowing, 'cause that's a good reminder, like the clock, back to the clock-like nature. Like if someone says they're born at high noon, their sun's going to be up by the midheaven, like no matter what season it is. If someone was born and I was born right at midnight, like I remember the nurse said, it's like, okay, you're right at the IC. So that's the other, you can start once you can break through the like math fear, which I know comes up a lot in astrology as well. Again, I failed geometry twice. So if I can do it, you can do it. Anyone can break through. It is fun to like, it's a fun party trick if someone's like, well, I'm a Capricorn rising. I'm like, it's like, and I was born at sunset. I'm like, oh, so like, are you a big relationship person? Thinking of their 7th house, having their sun there. And they're like, yeah, serial monogamous. And it's like, every fucking time, my guy, every time.
Yeah, and it's also really fun to be able to like another party trick fun thing is I feel like we're always keeping track of the transits. So it's really fun when someone tells you something like I'm a Capricorn rising. Well, I know what's coming into Capricorn right now is we're going to have this Pluto cap for a little while. We're going to have whatever. You're going to have we're Cancer season, opposition. So it is fun to be able to do astrology that way without the bones. And I think that's like a fun reminder.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's the way to like if you can like kind of like get the rising sign, just having that breakthrough, like you can forecast, like it's just like, because it is, I think the learning the rising sign, you're getting more comfortable with that will unlock, I think the holdup that comes with houses. And it's like, basically we just need to set this natal chart on some sort of map. And we do need to determine when the first house starts. And look, we have a system to do that. So isn't that convenient? They really thought of everything, these ancient people from whatever the fuck. Yeah, I mean, in terms, how do you feel like, has your rising signs come into play for you? Or like, I remember like first learning about like my big 3 in general and just being like, oh, that's okay. I'm not just a Taurus. What the fuck? But have you connected to your rising sign? Has it unveiled anything for you? What's been, I guess, your relationship with that?
I love risings. As you guys know, it's one of my very favorite placements in the natal chart, just in general, not my own, but just generally. I think it's really fun because it's one of the only ones that can be a wild card. Like it doesn't necessarily move with the planets and they don't all necessarily move in a particular, I mean it does, but you could just be born at any time of the day. So you could just have any rising with any moon or any, it's like, they don't have to
it's not beholden to gravity together. The same way.
Like, it's just any time of the day. And I think I don't know. I do think I'm like my rising sign. I think there's certain faces that I definitely make, and there's certain ways that my hair falls that like give me horns or whatever. And it's always like, the stuff you hate about yourself. It's never like, I'm never like, ooh, my sweet horn wrinkles. Like it's not that, but it is like sometimes I'll catch a glimpse of myself in the mirror and I'll just be like, oh, very bold today, like really going for Taurus fully. I do find that the more that I rely on it in some senses, like there are like parts of it I don't like, like I do think I'm a reliable person, which I think Taurus rising is definitely a reliable person. And sometimes I think that's a real detriment in life. Like sometimes I think I like just, and grass is always greener, but sometimes I do wish like people expected me to not show up or whatever. So I could get away with more that way. And so I do dig into other parts of my natal chart to access those things because that's definitely present regardless. And I do flake on stuff. I'm not always like 100. But yeah, I think challenging it has been a really fun part of astrology for me. It's the bowl. So it's like, how much can I carry is also a constant question for me. And for what and for whom and all of that.
Hell yeah. I definitely relate to my rising sign. I think because it's Libra and there's just so much, and maybe this is now and we're doing it in a more like, I know it's like in a healthy way, but I think there's just like so much of the like, for me, it feels hard to disentangle like wanting to be sociable and wanting to be people pleasy. That feels like a hard way to navigate, or a thing where I go like, I've been thinking about this a lot too, especially after not especially after reading this, but and in reading this too, of like, well, what am I good at? What am I good at? What are my strengths or something like that? And I think that it's hard to read like caring about what other people think or whatever as a strength sometimes. But I also think that if I'm thinking about the rising sign as like the gateway that gives access to all of these other things, then kind of it is one of the only places where I feel like I give access to other people, if that makes sense, or like where it is other focused, because so much of my chart is below the horizon and is kind of internal and is this like I don't know, ideas of things versus a thing, but also that wants to interact and kind of play with people. And it's like, if you don't present yourself as someone who is available for interacting or play or whatever, then kind of none of this other stuff gets to come out without a sounding board. And so I think that part of like, I don't know, being available and interested in people and being like inviting or friendly or nice, like, again, no one's gonna let you be just like come up and be mean to them. Some people like that, some people might, but you are more likely to have someone engage with you and be able to kind of do all of these other things if they are going to continue kind of talking to you, sort of thing. But it is one that I feel like I'm struggling with recently, more than in general. I think other times it also is like I don't know, a place to let other people be themselves too.
Let me ask you this, because it's coming up for me as you say that. How do you feel about, okay, so for me, my moon stuff, I like the aesthetic of that. Mm-hmm. Like I love like ocean, Cancer moon. I love the pearl thing. I just hard like relate. That really, really digs deep in. But the rising one for me, it takes some adjusting, and it kind of has to be done in a certain way. So I never really did like the cow kind of stuff growing up, and now I'm finding my pieces and my things that I'm like, oh, I really like this style of this or whatever. Do you feel like that? Because I feel like Libra is one where it's like scales, like no one wants to like get on a scale. Like, yes, but there are like old beautiful ones too, and there are like cool antique ones and stuff like that.
I think that yes, I absolutely I do, but not always for me. And I think that that's something that it also feels like a thing that sometimes doesn't feel like me, because I go like, well, I don't feel like a balanced, pulled together kind of thing. Another thing, although I love a matching something, I love a set. And I do think aesthetically, if we're talking rising, that is something that I like absolutely love. But I know that also stuff for me sometimes can lean almost like costumey, or something that's like too does not fit like with who I am, that it goes either like too little girl or too like something, not little girl, that sounds creepy, but do you know what I mean? Like a thing where I'm like, oh, that's fun, look, it's a thing with a thing on it, and that's like the whole thing together, but that's like too much. It's not actually the
bit of Coco Chanel.
Yes, that's
like one thing off.
Yes, exactly. Or like let's put a bow on a thing, and no, don't do that. It takes it, now it's like not an outfit anymore. But yeah, I don't know. I think that definitely like having it's Venus ruled, but also my Venus is in Sag conjunct Uranus. So I also feel like it's changing all the time. And so it's hard to feel like, I feel like some of that Libra stuff is a very like decisive aesthetic point of view. And I feel like mine is kind of, I want it to be able to change based on what I'm doing. And so I think that again is a hard thing to go like, oh, well, is this me or is me just whoever I need to be? And it's like, okay, yeah, yes, both things, but also how can that be? Is that a strength or is that bad?
And you guys are opposite Venus, Gemini Venus, and Sag Venus chart ruler. Interesting. Oppie Veenies. I mean, I don't think Gem and Sag aren't the most opposite. We've talked about this at length before, I think, of the polarities, but interesting. And that you also made a good reminder too there, Julia, with the rising sign is also going to determine if you have a day chart or a night chart, depending on where your sun is, if it's above the horizon line or below. So just more astro tools for the tool belt.
And just, I think that reminder of like what Lisa was saying of how you calculate it, knowing that we are doing this based on the movement of the sun and the relationship between your time of birth and the time of day, because how we determine sun sign season is where it's going through at sunrise. Then it is also like, how are we dividing up imaginary space into a way that kind of like tells us more about our internal experience.
And that's another like argument too for whole sign or equal sign houses, where if you are calculating by hand, calculating Placidus is going to be quite difficult.
Yes.
The houses are not all going to be equal sizes, all of those kind of things. So just remember when you're studying to keep in mind, like, some people were doing this pre-textbook, they were doing the actually looking at the stars and doing it by hand. And so like, that's why some of the systems are older and different. But I still want to hear about how Stevie relates to Cancer rising.
Yes. I'll go there, but I think just before I forget this too, it's fun too if you ever are stargazing and you have like the Sky View app or whatever and you're looking at the planets. It also, because I have like I don't know what app it is. Is it like Time Nomad? One of the like, I have one of the widgets on my iPhone that shows the chart of right now. So it's fun too to like be like, oh, like Venus, I know it's in Leo and it's like kind of right there in the sky. And then I'll look, I'm like, oh, it's in the what house? Like the 6th house right now, or like what, or no, it would be up in the sky. It'd be in the 11th house right now. So like you can kind of start to like literally look in the sky and then also literally look at a chart at the same time and be like, right, that makes sense. The sun's below the horizon line. Venus is up there. Venus was visible in the night sky, even though the sun was below the horizon. Like
we could see this right thing
now. Even at my wedding, my cousin, who's not an astrology person, was like, he's like, did you plan to have the moon rising above us when the sun was setting? And I was like, no, that was very convenient. That was very convenient. But when I looked at the chart of the wedding, I'm like, oh, right, the moon was like at that position. I could see it in the natal chart of the event. So also is helpful for sky planning. I too much of a Cancer rising. It's like, please commit me, like lock me in the submarine and throw me down into the ocean with the billionaires. Cause it's fine. It's just, it makes sense. And also I think too, when you learn your rising, it's like, oh my God, I'm such a water sign magnet. Like water sign people just can't get enough of me. And it's like, I'm off them for right now. So sorry, Cancers, Scorpios, and Pisces. Just, I don't have any more room for any more of you. It's just too much. But yeah, I really relate. And I think too, people do open up to me very easily and people want like, just end up in my like family and world. And like, things can just get really like committed and in. And then I think the fun part is it's like, but I'm an Aries moon. So that's a little like, you can't just say anything to this sweet Cancer rising because she has an opinion behind this. Also, I mean, I have Mars and Chiron right there. It tells a loaded story. There's a lot of like matriarchal stuff in my family. My mom's also a Cancer Mars too. So there's just like a lot of, I've related. I think having a planet with my rising felt, when I first learned about it, felt very like digestible. It's like, okay, well, I don't just have a rising. There's also a planet there and an asteroid. So this makes sense. So, and I think you don't have to have a planet in the sign of your rising. That is fine. I think just for me, it's like, okay. I got all these signs covered. Like now I have space to learn about more than just Taurus now. Cause of course, like we're going to start with our sun sign. So yeah. And I think too, like, my God, I think I got a reading with Colin Bedell. Was that pandemic? I don't know. Years ago. And I remember I was like, I'm sad. Like, I'm just sad. And in the summertime sadness, he's like, yeah. And he used Placidus, I believe. I don't think that's changed. And he was like, yeah, the sun, we're in Cancer season, but the sun is still in transiting your 12th house. Once that sun crosses that degree, it probably will feel a little lighter. And I'm sure there's other aspects and things going on too. So it doesn't mean, for anyone who has a 12th house sun or 12th house placements, like it doesn't mean you're doomed to depression. But
you
like,
are.
yeah,
I'm here. I'm 12th house sun. It's bad. It's bad out here. I know you're out there. You're always messaging me.
But I think too, for even sun there or not, like knowing that the sun is about to enter, it's not in your first house yet. It's not there in your spirit, in your soul, like in that full bodied space. And I was just like, that was like a big rising sign click for me, having that reading with him and being like, oh, right. Like that 12th house is things that can be not known to us a lot of the times, or things that feel a little outside of us, or like, what the fuck? So I think when we do have those first house transits, it feels a little more in our control, but not is anything in our control, but it feels, it gives the illusion of that at least.
It's of us, not out of our kind of like reach or whatever. And I think that that's something that makes sense about the rising sign. Even what you were saying, Lisa, of like wanting to be more unpredictable versus being seen as reliable, where it's like, what am I not that we can't also go against our rising, but there is a thing where it's like, oh no, this is the thing that also people project onto me, or this is the thing that I project out, whether or not that's the way I'm intending to do it. This is the way that it's most often received in the world. And then how is that both supporting and limiting the ways that we also want to express this other thing? And if, you have so much Taurus in the 12th versus the first, of that being like, oh, I'd also like to be not seen.
I'd prefer, for most of the time. And also I think for me, it is that thing of like, I established that too. It's not like, but every single sign is going to have a limitation to it. Yeah. And so someone who is a Pisces rising, who is super organized, who is this and whatever, and people are always like, you're just so chill. And they're like, I'm not fucking chill, and it's okay. Like, sometimes you need to be chill and sometimes you don't. And so you probably get invited to a lot of chill events. And but sometimes you're like, I need like work, and it's hard to get people to like give me work because they think I'm just chilling or whatever. Just an example, but every single sign has that.
Worst case, just switch the whole sign. Your first house sun. Boom. Things.
Yeah.
Well, there's other problems with having, because other planets are there too. But yeah, Jupiter first house, not necessarily easy. But yeah, I do switch.
That's me. When I'm mad
what I don't want to see today.
That's me with my Mars. I'm like, no, it's the first house today. Like I can't with the abyss. I'll move it in my personhood.
Exactly.
Well, also, I think we all have majority on the left on our eastern hemisphere. Yeah.
I'm pretty balanced. I have a lot of.
I'm pretty splayed.
You're splayed.
Well,
I have a stellium on the other side, and it's
so it is that pull. But I also think that is why. I mean, I guess that is truly like switch, where it is both in reading the inner sky portion about how we're dividing the chart and setting up the ascendant and houses, the eastern side being about kind of like free will and self-determination, the western side being a little bit more about fate and outcome. And so that kind of decision to go like, no, actually I'm choosing its first house today because I need to be the one that's in charge of how things are going, instead of being left to the winds of change and kind of going with the flow sort of thing. And so again, I think that is like the rising sign as a point of where we are just orienting ourselves in time and space and that being a thing of like, yeah, that is, sometimes you decide I'm being this person today, and sometimes this is what someone told me and that actually suits my needs the best. So if you think I'm this person, absolutely, because what I want to get out of this situation is blah, blah, X, Y, and Z, and me being seen this way is more profitable that way. But like, I don't know, just the thinking of those, that is also within the structure of our chart, which is determined by the rising sign, is more than just the planets itself. It is also like the ways in which we are doing that. And I think that probably speaks to everyone's rising sign too.
I'm like, do I want my Capricorn cluster to be health problems or relationship problems? I'll see which one I feel like it representing today.
Which one do I want to, which standard?
Truthfully, relationship every time, by the way. Like that wasn't clear.
Well, if you're in the middle of health problems, sometimes it's a little bit comforting to know the stars, or you know what I mean? It's like you're wishing
like, that
for
makes
them.
Sense.
But if you're like going to the doctor a bunch, you're like, what is going on? You know?
Yes.
And I feel like only just because just for any Placidus users, we can get those intercepted houses too with this system. So if you're like, wait, it skips right over this this sign, going, it's just, I mean, I think we have an episode on it, so just search that and go from there. But yeah, I think seeing where your chart ruler's at, knowing your degree, getting a sense of, especially if you can use like software and see like where the planets are transiting, just gives, I don't know, just like the rising unlocks the map. It just does, at least for me. It puts it all into perspective.
What are you looking at versus like I'm gonna
know so much more about you from your rising sign than just a little bit of like a planet or two.
It's like if you were looking at a map of a city, but it didn't have any of like the streets to get there. There was just the landmarks out there. You'd be like, oh, okay, cool. And I can kind of see where they are in orientation to themselves. But is that now we're not seeing that there's a mountain range that you have to get over? Oh, these things look close, but actually they're not at all.
Yeah. And then also having all your angles. So the first, fourth, seventh, and 10th houses are going to be the same modality as your rising, because that's how it's all connected. It's all sacred geometry. it's all very like, it's like once you can kind of break through, it's like so cleanly laid out.
Sometimes they won't be exact either too. Like
with the intercepted stuff.
But that's okay, because like we're saying, if you are at a party or whatever, it is fun to be able to be like, someone's talking about they want to ask you about astrology and they're talking about their work thing. If you have their rising, you can go instantly to what their midheaven is and where
Well, yeah. I'm never mind. I can't. she's simply can't. Well, it's just that. Yeah, it's that of like the same modality, or that, or of just like dividing things, because there are things that are like not. I don't want to say set in stone, because it's not that, but there are these things that we like kind of can't get around, and we can find ways to express, but they still come through those things. You can't be unborn and decide to be born somewhere else. You're born where you are, the time you are, the year you are. All of those things are things, again, that we know when we're talking about time, we are talking about rising sign, but we're also talking about then that this creates these fundamental structures in our chart that are things that we are constantly navigating with and around, and thinking about how that is both, like, again, not a planet, but thinking about how do those things either support or get in the way of the ways that certain things want to express, and then how does that determine how we are expressing. And I know that that's like complicated in a lot of things, but I think it does help give the fuller picture, because if we don't know, again, you aren't just a sun sign in space projecting out being pure Sagittarius energy at all times. You also have to operate within this structure, and how much does that allow you to be the thing that you want to be. Again, not saying that anyone can't be their sun sign because they have a rising sign that isn't that, but like you said, Lisa, it is that wild card one that could be completely unrelated to the rest of the things, whereas the other planets move with each other and are in a cycle relationship, whether they are in positive aspect or not. They still move within a cyclical manner, but rising sign is the wild card, and it is the thing that can determine
Well, it's also, again, something I think we talk about a lot in here, self-awareness. At the end of the day, there are people who go out and they are Sag with a Libra rising and they just act their sun. And you go, do you not know? Do you not know? I mean, we all have those people in our lives where you go, I guess you don't know what we think. Or you know what I mean? And it's like, we've given you all the clues or whatever. We've had the conversations, you know, but you just never seem to pick it up. And people don't like those people. So it is like, look at the thing and see and let people. And of course, like I use you as an example, but I'm not obviously talking about you. I use your example, but I just think like knowing how people see you, kind of a big deal, you know, kind of an issue.
The amount of Scorpio risings I've met who with this Leo midheaven, like it just unlocks something because it is like, why do I keep being asked to like be the center of attention? Like Scorpio, right? Like that's very opposite of Scorpio rising or the things you'll read of like in the shadows lurking, doing their thing. And then there is something being called to have the sun at this high visible spot. So it is really just, it adds so many like highlights and lowlights. I'm going very hair now, like in dimension to your chart, and that we contain multitudes.
Hell yeah.
Okay, least favorite rising sign, go. Okay, Virgo and Cancer.
I almost said one. But I can't.
I'm
trying to think.
I'm joking, but I'm not.
Trying to think of someone I don't like, but I don't have the rising sign, so it's not working out.
That is the harder part. It's harder to clock them because you'll need intimate birth information.
Scorpio might be a tough one on me. I say it every time. No, I don't mean it. I'm sorry. I use it every time. I say it every time.
No, but see, these strategic Scorpios are like, she's talking about the rising. It's not me. It's someone else.
I'm sorry.
Who is this? I know. I'm like, I do feel like there is one that comes to mind, but I don't want to say it because I don't want anyone to take it. I don't want anyone to take it personally.
I do want them to take it personally.
Let's carry this over to Patreon. Let's go to Patreon with this.
Yeah,
this is sure. Patreon. Yes, this is Patreon only. I'm like, I want one person to take it personally, and I want no one else to take it.
I'm telling you, if you hear this and you think that something's about you that I've said, it is, and it is personal.
I agree. Same. You heard me. I accidentally leaked mine, so you get a taste. We'll find out Julia's and Lisa's least favorite rising sign. I also did say my own, so I'm allowed. I'm allowed.
Yeah.
And then I'll say it again for the people in back. Virgo.
Maybe it is.
Save it.
I was gonna say I can. Okay. All right. I'll save it.
All right. Bye.
Sorry
See us on Patreon. Thank you for listening. Rising. Oh, and last thing, I think we mentioned it already. I mean, we said it because of the thing, but again, saying it explicitly, read your rising sign horoscope because like Lisa said, this is where everything's happening. You might need to adjust, like Lisa said, depending on your house system, what is in the first house there. But again, this is how we integrate astrology and how we know what that is. We are reading for a rising sign because horoscopes are telling you where the planets are moving, not where they are in relationship to your natal planets. We have no idea when you're writing a horoscope. So this is the only one that we can say, generally speaking. So read horoscopes for your rising sign and see if that doesn't play out a little bit better.
Sometimes, like a Susan Miller, for example, she'll pepper in, and the moon in Virgo will be trining the sun. Like she'll acknowledge the part where she is talking about the sun. But if they're not talking about the exact sun getting lit up, they're talking about your fucking rising. Okay. Yeah. They're talking about where your houses are in relation to your rising sign because that's where it sets your fucking houses.
Yes. So
read
for your rising.
Important reminder.
Message us with your least favorite rising sign.
Comment on we don't know post because for this episode.
Yeah, comment with your
and
least
tag
favorite.
The person.
Yes. And join us on Patreon to find out our answers. What's your patreon.com/what's your sign
podcast.
Thank you. Okay. We love you. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye.
Bye.